Hello, and welcome back. It's great to have you here again. If you type the keyword armor into the history of life on Earth, you'll be greeted by an army of absolute monsters. At the end of the Devonian period, there was Dunkleosteus, the apex predator whose bite was powerful enough to shear straight through bone. By the end of the Jurassic, Stegosaurus was patrolling the land like a living battle tank, its towering rows of bony plates stretching from its back to its tail, ending in a weapon powerful enough to punch through flesh and shatter bone with a single swing. Then, near the end of the Cretaceous, the prehistoric world witnessed the arrival of Ankylosaurus, the ultimate masterpiece of armored evolution. A perfect remix of raw muscle and impenetrable armor allowed this lifelong herbivore to stand its ground against, and sometimes even defeat, one of the most formidable carnivores in Earth's history. Fast forward to the Pleistocene, and we meet Glyptodon, the giant, long-lost cousin of today's armadillo. Walking boulders weighing well over a ton, they once again forced even the deadliest predators to think twice before taking a bite. And those are just 4 representatives, handpicked from the dozens of living tanks that once roamed this planet. Dunkleosteus alone belonged to a family of around 10 species, most of them top-tier predators. They were members of the placoderms, an entire class of armored fish that included at least 250 genera and more than 400 known species. And that's not even counting prehistoric giant turtles like Archelon ischiros and Stupendomys geographicus, or colossal crocodilians such as Dinosuchus, Sarcosuchus, and Purosaurus. Throughout Earth's ancient history, thousands of armored animals evolved and flourished before eventually being crossed off the book of life, one by one. Despite how enormous they once were, both in size and in number, the armored community of today has been reduced to little more than a few species of scaly anteaters, timid burrowing mammals like armadillos, armored lizards such as the armadillo-girdled lizard, and even armored fish like this pleco. In the modern world, large armored animals have become strangely rare. The only true giants left are crocodiles and turtles. Some species, like the saltwater crocodile and the leatherback sea turtle, are certainly massive by human standards, but compared with their long-extinct relatives, both their size and the protective power of their armor have been dramatically scaled down. At first glance, it's easy to jump to the conclusion that armor simply isn't a good survival strategy, and that evolution has almost abandoned it altogether. But if you raise an eyebrow and think about it a little more carefully, the story becomes something entirely different. If armor isn't an optimal solution for survival, then why has this same body plan kept showing up again and again? Why did it evolve independently in completely different groups of animals, separated by tens of millions of years, each time taking on an even more bizarre form than before? Is it nothing more than God hitting the server reset button, starting a new save file after deleting the old one? Or is there a hidden mechanic at work? That's exactly what we're going to find out in today's video. And as much as I love Dunkleosteus, the opening chapter of today's story began long before it ever existed. Around 538 million years ago, rising oxygen levels and the emergence of predators ignited an evolutionary arms race known as the Cambrian Explosion. As predators evolved teeth, jaws, and powerful grasping appendages, prey responded by developing thicker shells and hard armor that wrapped around their bodies. Shells and armor became the very first mechanical defenses in the history of animals. They marked the turning point from fragile, passive life to life built around defense, competition, and increasingly complex body plans. If the Cambrian Explosion gave birth to armor in its most primitive form, then the Devonian period witnessed the arrival of the very first biological tanks. Come on, Dunkleosteus, time to wake up and steal the spotlight. Around 400 million years ago, the Devonian seas were filled with creatures that had dumped every possible stat point into defense. Some were jawless fish with oversized heads and tiny bodies, their skulls reinforced until they looked like giant armored discs gliding through the water. They had armor too. They also had the classic big head, tiny body build, but unlike the jawless fish, the placoderms came equipped with jaws. They were among the earliest and most dominant predatory vertebrates ever to rule the Earth. Just as their name suggests, their heads and chests were protected by massive interlocking bony plates. while the rest of their skeleton was made primarily of cartilage. Sitting at the very top of the food chain were giants like Dunkleosteus, a fish that, if you only looked at the specs on paper, you'd swear was a battle tank. On species such as Dunkleosteus torelli, the thickest sections of its armor measured an astonishing 5 to 7.6 centimeters. But its armor wasn't just there for defense. It was also the source of its incredible offensive power. Those massive bony plates served as anchor points for enormous jaw muscles, allowing Dunkleosteus and several other placoderms to generate bite forces unlike anything any ocean had ever seen before. Now fast forward to the Triassic period, when reptiles rose to dominance. Forests spread across the land, and the very first true dinosaurs made their appearance. By the time the Jurassic period arrived and forests blanketed the continents, both predators and herbivores had grown to colossal sizes. But being gigantic came with a price. Many herbivores had become far too large to hide among the vegetation and far too slow, too clumsy, or both, to pull off the final strategy from the ancient military playbook. So evolution came up with something else. A grass-powered tank. Stegosaurus. This plant-eating giant stretched up to 7.5 meters in length and weighed around 5 tons, roughly the size of a fully grown African bush elephant. Now here's the impressive part. Stegosaurus carried 2 towering rows of bony plates running along its spine, primarily used for intimidation and regulating body temperature. And at the end of its tail, for razor-sharp spikes, each measuring 0.6 to 0.9 meters long. In species like Stegosaurus stenops, those spikes were more than enough to make massive predators like Allosaurus pay dearly for a careless attack. Stegosaurus wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. Its armored back made predators hesitate, while its spiked tail created a deadly no-go zone that forced attackers to keep their distance. And if they got too close, it had no problem finishing the fight. Apparently, Mother Nature still wasn't satisfied with Stegosaurus, because by the late Cretaceous, she introduced Ankylosaurus. If Stegosaurus was a tank armed with spears, then Ankylosaurus was a full-blown heavy armored tank. Its entire body was wrapped in thick bony armor, tightly fitted together like overlapping steel plates, protecting everything from its head and back to both flanks. The masterpiece of this design was its enormous tail club, a solid mass of bone at the end of the tail powerful enough to shatter the leg bones of gigantic predators. Even a Tyrannosaurus rex. Ankylosaurus had a low, broad, heavily built body. It moved slowly, but it was incredibly stable. Instead of running away, it embraced the tank strategy. Absorb the hit first, counterattack second. Its armor made killing bites incredibly difficult to land, while its massive tail club delivered devastating counterstrikes against anything reckless enough to attack from behind or from the side. They are the perfect examples of an evolutionary strategy that was both extreme and remarkably effective. Maximize defense, sacrifice speed, and become a mobile fortress that was nearly impossible to break in the prehistoric world. The Pleistocene seems to have been the last time Earth ever witnessed a true heavyweight armored animal. Living in Ice Age South America, Glyptodon grew to the size of a small car. Its body was encased in a single continuous bony shell, while its tail was wrapped in armored rings that made it look like a moving bunker. It shared its world with some of the most terrifying mammalian predators ever to exist, from saber-toothed cats and giant bears to enormous jaguars and packs of wolves. And yet, just like Ankylosaurus before it, Glyptodon flourished. It wasn't fast, but bringing one down was an entirely different story. Predators could barely find a vulnerable spot to sink their teeth into. Every swing of that tail could make a meal far more trouble than it was worth. So it's clear that armor was one of the earliest and most effective defensive strategies ever to evolve, first appearing during the Cambrian period more than 500 million years ago. What's even more remarkable is that this feature evolved independently over and over again in completely different groups of animals, from ancient armored fish and dinosaurs to prehistoric mammals. Armor wasn't just a defensive tool. It also became a source of power, the power to make predators hesitate, and in some cases, the power to become the dominant predator itself. So then, why is it that every time armored evolution reaches its peak, it disappears? Turns out, evolution is a better balanced game than, well, Certain games that still haven't figured out balance after 200 years. Every evolutionary advantage comes with a price. Back in the Devonian seas, Dunkleosteus and its relatives dominated thanks to a nearly perfect combination of offense and defense. A heavily armored head paired with an absolutely monstrous bite force made them absurdly overpowered in the slow, stable oceans of the early Paleozoic. But the moment the environment began changing faster than those armored giants could adapt, they were finished. During the late Devonian, roughly 372 to 359 million years ago, Earth experienced a prolonged series of mass extinction events. Oxygen levels in the oceans plummeted, vast reef systems collapsed, and marine ecosystems became increasingly unstable. Large-bodied, heavily armored, slow-growing animals like Dunkleosteus simply couldn't adapt in time. The very armor that had once been their greatest advantage suddenly became their greatest burden. As a result, most of the dominant marine animals of the era, including Dunkleosteus and the entire placoderm lineage, were wiped out. The first great age of armor had come to an end. By the late Jurassic, around 150 million years ago, another long ecological decline was already underway. Climate shifts, along with major changes in the composition and structure of plant life, reshaped terrestrial ecosystems. At the same time, new groups of faster, more adaptable herbivorous dinosaurs, such as ornithopods and ceratopsians, began to outcompete Stegosaurus, slowly pushing it toward extinction. Its armor and towering plates were excellent for intimidation, but they were also incredibly heavy and extremely expensive to build and carry. Its spiked tail remained a deadly weapon. But eventually, that alone wasn't enough to offset the ever-growing pressures of survival. Unlike Stegosaurus, which faded away gradually over time, Ankylosaurus was swept away almost overnight by a global catastrophe. One that, let's be honest, everyone already knows about. 66 million years ago, the Chicxulub asteroid slammed into Earth, triggering worldwide environmental chaos. Temperatures plummeted. Photosynthesis collapsed. Entire food webs unraveled. In a world like that, massive armored herbivores such as Ankylosaurus were among the first to disappear. And just like that, the golden age of armor came to an end. But time and time again, armor always finds a way to come back. Why? After studying thousands of animal species, scientists noticed an interesting pattern. Very small animals usually survive by hiding. They camouflage themselves to avoid detection, or retreat into places predators simply can't reach: coral reefs, narrow crevices, deep burrows. On the other hand, truly massive animals like elephants and rhinoceroses can afford to stand their ground and face predators head-on. The idea is surprisingly simple. Life is generally safest when you're either very small or very large. That leaves a dangerous middle ground, a size range where an animal is big enough to look appetizing, too big to hide, not powerful enough to fight, and usually not fast enough to run away. When evolution finds itself trapped in that dilemma, armor becomes the logical way out. An armored animal carries its shelter wherever it goes, sacrificing speed and agility in exchange for a safer, more laid-back lifestyle. Instead of chasing prey, it digs, scavenges, and feeds on whatever is readily available, things like termites or leaves. In warm climates, armored animals are easily warmed by the sun, allowing them to reach their ideal operating temperature with little effort. And warm climates usually mean a stable food supply year-round, helping offset the enormous energy cost of building and carrying around such heavy armor. When danger appears, the smaller ones tuck in their heads, curl into a ball, and pray that their armor can take the beating. If they're big enough, though, they play defense first, then hit back. That strategy works, until the world around them suddenly changes. Glyptodon, the giant armadillo-like mammal, flourished in South America during the late Pliocene, around 3 million years ago, when the climate became drier and vast grasslands spread across the continent. But after the last ice age, roughly 11,000 years ago, the climate shifted once again, and the vegetation changed with it. Almost overnight, that walking bunker became a burden. As food grew scarce, Glyptodon's massive shell demanded more energy than the environment could provide. Its armor was nearly impenetrable against claws and razor-sharp fangs. but it meant very little against the tools and hunting strategies of a far more intelligent newcomer that arrived in South America after the Ice Age: humans. So, to sum it all up, for most of Earth's history, surviving meant being hunted. And time after time, evolution kept arriving at the same solution: armor. From the Cambrian oceans, where the first animals wrapped themselves in hard shells and sharp spines, to the armored fishes of the Devonian, encased in heavy bony plates, to Cretaceous giants like Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurus, carrying shields and bone clubs, and finally to Glyptodon, the walking boulder of the age of mammals. Armor evolved again and again as one of the most effective survival strategies in worlds where predation was intense. Yet ecosystems remained stable and rich in resources. But extreme specialization always came with a cost. The moment the rules of the game changed, yesterday's greatest advantage became tomorrow's greatest liability. Adapt too slowly, and you die. Every great age of armor ended the same way, with extinction. But armor itself never truly disappeared. It simply retreated into the planet's quieter corners, where the living tank body plan could still survive. And if history has taught us anything, it's that evolution loves to repeat a good idea. So perhaps one day, the golden age of armor will return once again. But that day would come millions, perhaps even tens of millions of years, after humanity is long gone. At least, that's what I think. What about you? Do you believe giant armored creatures will one day walk the surface of our planet again? Let me know what you think down in the comments. And with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.